Welcome back to At Sarah Werewolf Romance Collection, where the alphas are obsessive and the heroines refuse to be tamed. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments, and drop a pig nose emoji if your pet currently runs your house better than you do. Today we have a special one. It's hilarious, it's spicy, and it involves a furious vegan event planner and a stubborn alpha king who just wants to feed her. But before we start, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the lights on and the alphas fed. Oh, and I have to introduce the real alpha of this story. We don't just have wolves today. Meet Tofu. He's a micro pig who weighs 70 pounds, wears yellow rain boots, and thinks expensive Italian leather shoes are a food group. Trust me, you're here for the romance, but you'll stay for the pig. If you hear chaos, it's probably Tofu. Now, take a deep breath. Dinner is served, and the door is locked. Let's read. Chapter 1. The Carnivore's Contract. The air inside the ironclad security conference room was so cold, Verity Sage could see her own breath. Or maybe that was just the smoke coming out of her ears. "You want to serve what?" Verity asked, her voice dangerously calm. She tapped her bamboo stylus against the sleek black glass of the conference table. "Venison tartare," the man at the head of the table rumbled. "And wild boar, whole roasted." Bramwell Roth didn't sit in a chair, he occupied it. He was a study in violent geometry, shoulders that looked like they could bench press a small car, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and a presence that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He was 6'5" of brooding billionaire silence, and currently he was looking at her like she was a very confusing math problem. "Mr. Roth," Verity said, adjusting the pencils, holding back her chaotic curls. "I run Sage and Sprout. My brand is Events That Don't Cost the Earth. Serving a literal blood feast at the Winter Solstice Gala, an event meant to rebrand your security firm as community-friendly, is like serving tofu at a vampire wedding. It's off-brand, it's archaic, and frankly, it's gross." Bram didn't blink. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, tracked the movement of her stylus. "My men require protein, high caloric density." "Your men are security contractors, not medieval warriors preparing for a siege," Verity countered, leaning forward. She ignored the way the air around him seemed to hum with static electricity. She'd dealt with difficult clients before, bridezillas, corporate narcissists, toddlers, but Bramwell Roth was in a league of his own. He was terrifyingly still, predatory. "We need meat," he stated, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in her chest. "And the planet needs trees, but here we are," Verity snapped. She pulled the contract toward her. "Look, I don't compromise on ethics. I can give you a menu that is hearty, delicious, and doesn't involve mounting a pig's head on a spike. Seitan briskets, mushroom Wellingtons, food that says, we protect the vulnerable, not we eat them." Bram's nostrils flared slightly. He took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to her neck, then back to her eyes. For a second, Verity thought the lights overhead flickered. "No," he said simply. Verity stared at him. The arrogance, the absolute, unyielding wall of muscle and stubbornness. Her ex Vaughn used to do this, make unilateral decisions and expect her to fall in line. Not again. She stood up, the legs of her chair screeching against the floor. "Then you don't have an event planner." Bram blinked, looking genuinely surprised. "Sit down, Miss Sage." "No." She mimicked his tone perfectly. She grabbed the contract, ripped it cleanly in half, and dropped the pieces on the pristine glass table. Find someone else to cater your carnage. I have a planet to save. She grabbed her bag, marching toward the door. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Oh God, I just walked out on the biggest contract of my career. But her spine was steel. Miss Sage, Bram called out. He hadn't moved, but his voice stopped her hand on the door handle. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, resonant sound that made the hair on her arm stand up. She turned. He was watching her with an intensity that made her knees feel weak. His eyes had shifted, the storm gray bleeding into a molten gold around the pupils. You're making a mistake, he said softly. The mistake was thinking you wanted change, Verity shot back. You just want a prettier mask for the same old monster. She slammed the door. Inside the silent conference room, Bramwell Roth stared at the torn contract. He picked up the piece with her signature, bringing it closer. It smelled like ozone, rain, and fresh herbs. His wolf paced inside his chest, agitated and whining. Mine, it growled. She has teeth. Bram rubbed the back of his neck, the plastic of his expensive fountain pen snapping in his grip. Ink bled over his fingers, black as oil. Damn it, he whispered. Chapter 2. The Pursuit. Verity was aggressively labeling her spice jars when the delivery truck arrived. Delivery for Verity Sage! The driver shouted from the street below. Verity wiped her hands on her vintage apron and peered out the window of her third-floor apartment. A massive flatbed truck was idling next to her parked Vespa, the P. On the back of the truck sat a wooden crate the size of a refrigerator. What on earth? She muttered. 10 minutes later, the crate was in her living room, taking up all the available floor space. Her pet micro-pig, Tofu, was circling it, oinking suspiciously. Tofu was wearing his yellow rain boots because it was drizzling outside, and he refused to have wet hooves. It's from Ironclad Security. Verity read the shipping label, her eyebrows shooting up. She grabbed a crowbar and pried the lid off. Inside sat a brand new, high-performance engine block. Chrome, shiny, and completely useless to her. Next to it was a smaller box. She opened it to find 20 pounds of organic kale. Is he serious? Verity asked Tofu. Is this a joke? Is he mocking me? Tofu snorted and tried to eat a kale leaf. He thinks he can buy me? Verity fumed, pacing the small room. He thinks because my scooter is old and I eat plants, I need charity? Or worse, is this his way of saying, here's your rabbit food, now come back and cook my steak? She grabbed her phone, dialing the number on the business card Bram's assistant had given her. It went straight to voicemail. Fine, she hissed. If he wants to play games, let's play. She loaded the kale into her oversized tote bag. The engine was too heavy, so she took a picture of it and printed it out on her portable label maker, sticking the word unsolicited across the photo. Come on, Tofu, she commanded. We're going to corporate, Tofu squealed, sensing adventure, or snacks, and trotted after her. 30 minutes later, Verity burst into the lobby of Ironclad Security. The receptionist, a terrified-looking young man, didn't even try to stop her as she marched toward the elevators, a pig in rain boots clicking along beside her. I need to see Mr. Roth, she announced to the empty hallway on the top floor. She threw the double doors to his office open. Bram was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the foggy skyline of Meridian City. He turned as she entered, his massive frame silhouetted against the gray light. He looked startled, which, for Bram, meant his eyebrows twitched 1 millimeter. You, Verity said, dumping the bag of kale onto his pristine mahogany desk, are a jerk. Bram looked at the kale, then at Verity, then at the pig sniffing his expensive rug. "I was apologizing," Bram rumbled, his voice sounding rusty, like he hadn't used it all day. "With an engine block?" Verity asked incredulously. "For a Vespa? Do you know how mechanics work? That thing would crush the pea like a soda can." Bram rubbed the back of his neck, looking genuinely confused. It was the highest-rated engine on the market. Efficient, powerful. "I don't want power, Roth. I want respect." Verity poked him in the chest. It was like poking a concrete wall. "And I don't want your pity kale. I can buy my own vegetables." Bram stared at her finger on his chest. His eyes went wide, the gold flecks swirling. "I wasn't pitying you." "Then what was it?" "Provision," he said simply. "Your vehicle is unsafe. Your diet requires volume." Verity gaped at him. "Did you just call me a grazer?" Tofu, bored with the rug, trotted over to Bram. The pig looked up at the 6'5" giant, let out a demanding squeal, and headbutted Bram's shin. Bram flinched, backing up until his legs hit his desk. He looked terrified. "It has boots," Bram whispered, staring at Tofu. "Yes, he has sensitive feet," Verity snapped. "Unlike you, apparently, who has a sensitive ego." Bram looked from the pig to Verity, a strange flush creeping up his neck. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice low. "Do what? Be a human being?" "Apologize," he corrected. "I don't usually have to." Chapter 3. The Pig and the Predator. "Well, start learning." Verity crossed her arms. "Rule number 1. Don't send car parts to a scooter owner. Rule number 2. Don't insult my ethics with bulk leafy greens." Tofu, realizing he was being ignored, decided to escalate. He spotted the leather tassels on Bram's loafers, Italian, hand-stitched, probably costing more than Verity's rent. With a joyous snort, Tofu lunged. "Hey!" Bram shouted, jumping onto his own desk. The sight of the terrifying Alpha King, the man who supposedly ran the city's underworld, standing on top of his mahogany desk to escape a 50-pound pig in yellow boots, was too much. Verity snorted. Then she giggled. Then she was full-on laughing, clutching her stomach. "He's not a velociraptor, Roth!" she gasped, wiping a tear from her eye. "He just likes leather!" Bram stood on the desk, looking down at the pig chewing on his shoe. He looked ridiculous. He looked human. He looked at Verity laughing, and the terror in his face melted into something else. Softness. Hunger. He watched her laugh like he was memorizing the sound. The static in the air calmed down. The lights stopped flickering. "Tofu, drop it!" Verity commanded, composing herself. She pulled a dog treat from her pocket. Tofu immediately spat out the soggy leather and trotted over to her, sitting politely. Bram climbed down from the desk, straightening his suit. He looked at his ruined shoe, then at Verity. He didn't look angry. He looked stunned. "You laughed," he said. "You jumped on a desk," she countered, grinning. "It has teeth," Bram defended himself, pointing at Tofu. "So do you," Verity said, her gaze dropping to his mouth before she could stop herself. "But I didn't jump on the furniture." The air shifted again. The tension returned, but it wasn't the cold, angry tension from before. It was thick, warm, and heavy. Bram took a step toward her. He smelled like cedar and something sharp, like ozone. "I want to renegotiate," Bram said. "I'm not serving venison," Verity warned, though her heart was doing a traitorous little flip. "I know," Bram said. He looked pained. Dinner. Tonight. At the Eyrie. We discuss the menu. Compromise. Verity hesitated. Going to a billionaire's private estate for dinner was a bad idea. It was a classic bad idea. But she looked at his ruined shoe and the way he was wringing his hand slightly, looking at her like she was a bomb he didn't want to go off. Fine, she said. But Tofu comes. He doesn't do well alone at night. Bram looked at the pig. The pig looked at Bram and narrowed its eyes. Acceptable, Bram grunted. And Roth? Verity added, turning at the door. If you try to serve me a salad, I will set your curtains on fire. Bram's lips twitched, a microscopic, almost smile. Noted. As the elevator doors closed, Verity leaned against the wall, exhaling a breath she didn't know she was holding. What are we doing, Tofu? She whispered. Tofu oinked and licked the Italian leather taste off his lips. Chapter 4. The Lion's Den. The Eyrie was not a house. It was a fortress built into the side of a cliff overlooking the churning gray ocean. Verity parked the P next to a row of black armored SUVs that looked like they belonged in a presidential motorcade. Her mint green scooter looked like a toy in comparison. Okay, be cool, she told Tofu, who was sitting in the sidecar wearing his formal evening sweater. It had a bow tie knit into the collar. Don't eat the furniture. Don't headbutt the host. She walked up the massive stone steps. The front door, a slab of dark oak and iron, opened before she could knock. Bram stood there. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a black button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that looked like they were carved from teak wood. He looked domestic and terrifying. You came, he said, his voice rough. I promised, Verity said, gripping her bag strap. Where's the conference room? Dining room, Bram corrected. He stepped aside. The inside of the Eyrie was like a cathedral of shadows. High ceilings, stone floors, and fireplaces big enough to roast an ox. It was beautiful, but cold. Lonely. Bram led her down a long hallway. Tofu clicked along beside her, slipping slightly on the polished stone. Bram kept glancing down at the pig, giving it a wide berth. They entered the dining room. It was lit by hundreds of candles. The table was set for two. Crystal glasses, heavy silverware, linen napkins. It was unmistakably romantic. Verity stopped. I thought this was a business meeting. We are doing business, Bram said, pulling out a chair for her. We need to eat. Verity sat down cautiously. Tofu curled up under her chair. Bram sat at the head of the table, leaving the chair to his right empty so he could sit across from her. It felt intimate. Too intimate. So, Verity started, needing to break the silence. The menu. I was thinking we could do a root vegetable medley for the main course. Hearty, winter-themed. Bram stared at her. He looked nervous. He was twisting his napkin in his large hands. About the food, he started. The double doors to the kitchen swung open. Two staff members in crisp uniforms walked out. One was carrying a bottle of wine. The other was carrying a massive silver platter with a domed lid. Verity's stomach dropped. She could smell it. The rich, iron-heavy scent of meat. They placed the platter in front of her. Bram, she said warningly. Just wait, Bram said, his eyes pleading. The server lifted the lid. Steam curled up into the candlelight. Sitting in the center of the platter was a massive, thick-cut steak. It was seared perfectly on the outside, glistening with juice. It looked like a T-bone from a cow that had been fed nothing but happiness and then betrayed. Silence slammed into the room. Verity stared at the steak. She felt the blood drain from her face, replaced by a hot flush of humiliation. He hadn't listened. He hadn't heard a single word she said. He thought he could just force his way, force his preferences, force his nature onto her. It was Vaughn all over again. "You'll eat what I order, Verity. You're too difficult." She stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the stone. "Is this a joke?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "Verity." Bram stood up too, reaching out a hand. "I told you," she said, backing away. "I told you I'm vegan. Do you think this is funny? Trying to force me to eat this?" "No, listen, I'm leaving," she snapped. She grabbed her bag. "Come on, Tofu." She turned and marched toward the heavy oak doors. She grabbed the iron handle and pulled. It didn't budge. She pulled again. Locked. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her anger. She spun around. Bram was standing by the table, looking massive in the candlelight. The shadows seemed to stretch toward him. "Did you just lock me in?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave. Bram walked around the table. He moved with that predatory stillness, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He stopped inches from her. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. His eyes were gold, molten, desperate gold. "Sit down, Verity," he rumbled. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, through the soles of her shoes, straight into her bones. "You'll eat what I serve." Chapter 5. You'll eat what I serve. The command hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Verity's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The mask was off. The charming awkwardness, the fear of the pig, it was all an act. Underneath, he was just another controlling man who didn't like being told no. But Verity Sage had survived a controlling man before. She had rebuilt her life from scratch. She wasn't going to let some billionaire with a god complex break her. She lifted her chin, meeting his golden gaze with fierce, hazel eyes. "No," she said. Bram blinked. The gold in his eyes flickered. "Excuse me?" he said, sounding less like an alpha king and more like a confused puppy. "I said no," Verity repeated, stepping into his space. "I am not a child. I am not your employee. And I am certainly not eating a dead animal just to soothe your ego. Unlock the door, Roth, or I swear to God I will let the pig loose on your upholstery." Bram looked down at her. He looked at her clenched fists, her defiant chin, the fire in her eyes. He didn't look angry. He looked awestruck. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his dark hair, messing up the perfect styling. The predatory tension leaked out of his shoulders. "Please," he said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "Just sit. Look at it." "I'm looking at a heart attack on a plate." She crossed her arms. "It's not," Bram groaned, rubbing his face. "Just cut it, please. If you cut it and you still hate it, I will unlock the door. I will drive you home. I will buy you a tofu factory. Just cut the damn thing." Verity hesitated. He looked desperate. Not dangerous desperate, but "I worked really hard on this project desperate." "Fine," she hissed. "But if I vomit, it's on your shoes." She marched back to the table and sat down. Bram rushed to sit opposite her, watching her with laser focus. He looked like he was holding his breath. Verity picked up the heavy silver steak knife. She glared at the slab of meat. It looked incredibly realistic, the char marks, the juices. She stabbed it. It gave way instantly. No resistance of muscle fibers, no gristle. She sliced through it. The inside wasn't pink or red. It was a deep, vibrant purple. Verity paused. She brought the slice closer to her nose. It didn't smell like iron and fat. It smelled like earth, smoke, and coconut? She looked up at Bram. His face was bright red. The Alpha King of Meridian City was blushing. "It's beets," he mumbled, looking at the tablecloth, "and lentils, and wheat gluten. I smoked the mushrooms with hickory wood to get the savory profile." Verity's knife clattered onto the plate. "What?" "I watched 7 hours of YouTube tutorials," Bram admitted, his voice gaining speed. "Getting the marbling right was the hardest part. I had to freeze coconut oil and fold it into the dough layers. And the blood is just beet juice reduction with a little pomegranate for acidity." He looked up at her, his eyes vulnerable. "You said you wanted hearty. You said you didn't want a salad. I wanted to show you I could provide, even if it's plants." Verity stared at him. She looked at the steak, a masterpiece of culinary engineering. Then she looked at the door. "Why did you lock the door?" she asked softly. Bram winced. "I panicked. I thought you were going to leave before you saw the inside. I didn't want you to think I didn't listen." "So you imprisoned me?" "I secured the perimeter," he corrected automatically, then winced again. "Yes, I see how that was suboptimal." Verity looked at the beet steak. She took a bite. It was incredible. Smoky, savory, rich, and perfectly textured. It was better than any vegan restaurant meal she'd ever had. She chewed slowly, watching him. He was terrifying. He was socially disastrous. He had locked her in a room. But he had also spent all day massaging gluten and beets because she told him she was hungry. "It's..." Verity swallowed. Bram gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Yes?" "It needs salt," she lied, fighting a smile. Bram let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. He grabbed the salt shaker and offered it to her like it was the crown jewels. "Right, salt. I can do salt." Under the table, Tofu nudged Verity's leg. She reached down and scratched his ears, her eyes never leaving the blushing giant across from her. "Oh no," she thought. "I think I'm in trouble." Chapter 6. The Beet Wellington. Verity chewed slowly, the rich, smoky flavor of the beet and mushroom reduction flooding her senses. It was impossible. It was a paradox on a plate. This meal was the culinary equivalent of a heavyweight boxer knitting a delicate lace doily. Across the table, Bramwell Roth watched her with the intensity of a predator tracking prey through high grass. He hadn't touched his own food. His large hands were clasped on the tablecloth, knuckles white, as if he were physically restraining himself from asking for a verdict. "Well?" he finally rasped, his voice rougher than usual. Verity swallowed, dabbing her mouth with the linen napkin. "It's..." She paused, watching his storm-gray eyes widen slightly in panic. "It's the best Wellington I've ever had, vegan or otherwise." The tension left Bram's massive frame so suddenly that Verity half expected him to collapse. He let out a long, ragged exhale, slumping back in his chair. "Thank God," he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. The pastry was temperamental. It kept melting. "You made the puff pastry from scratch too?" Verity asked, incredulous. "Bram, people go to culinary school for years to master lamination. You run a paramilitary security firm." "I hold focus well," he said simply, picking up his fork. He finally took a bite of his own creation, chewing methodically. "And I needed to ensure the caloric density was sufficient. The lentils provide the protein base." Verity studied him. In the flickering candlelight of the Eyrie, Stripped of his suit jacket and his terrifying CEO persona, he looked less like a monster and more like a very large, very lonely man who didn't know how to ask for companionship without locking the door first. "Why?" she asked softly. Bram froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "Why what?" "Why go to this much trouble? You could have hired a private chef. You could have ordered takeout from the Green Radish. Why spend 7 hours massaging coconut oil into flour?" Bram looked at the beets bleeding onto his plate. He seemed to be searching for the right words in a language he wasn't fluent in. "Provision," he said finally, using that clinical word again. He looked up, and for a second, his eyes flashed that molten gold. "I cannot... Ooh." He grimaced at the word. "I am not charming, Verity. I don't know how to make small talk about the weather, but I can ensure you are fed. I can ensure you are safe. I can build... things." He gestured vaguely at the meal, the fortress around them, the world. Verity felt a flush creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the wine. It was such a primal, archaic statement, delivered with absolute sincerity. He was trying to take care of her in the only language he spoke. Action. "You're right," she said, breaking the heavy silence. "You are terrible at small talk." And locking the door was a felony-adjacent move. Bram winced. "I apologized." "But," she continued, reaching across the table to touch his hand. His skin was burning hot, startlingly warm against her cool fingers. "This is a good start. Just, next time maybe lead with the food, not the imprisonment." Bram stared at her hand on his. He turned his palm over slowly, interlacing his fingers with hers. His hand engulfed hers completely, careful and gentle, like he was holding a soap bubble. "Noted," he whispered. Under the table, Tofu let out a contented snore, dreaming of vegetable scraps. For a moment, amidst the stone walls and the storm brewing outside, Verity didn't feel afraid. She felt seen. Chapter 7. Enter the Patriarch. The moment was shattered by a sound like a thunderclap. The heavy oak doors of the dining hall didn't just open. They were kicked inward with enough force to rattle the silverware. Tofu woke up with a screech, scrambling out from under Verity's chair, his hooves skittering on the stone floor. Bram snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned, sitting bolt upright. His expression shifted instantly from vulnerable to annoyed. "Grandfather," Bram growled. Stride for stride, the man entering the room looked like an older, weathered version of Bram. He walked with a heavy cane carved from black oak, but the way he moved suggested the cane was more of a weapon than a crutch. He wore a tweed suit that had seen better decades, and his white hair was wild, like Einstein after a bar fight. "Don't you grandfather me, you moody gargoyle," Elias Roth barked. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling. "What is that smell? Is something dying, or are you cooking vegetables again?" Elias limped toward the table, ignoring Bram entirely. His sharp, pale eyes landed on Verity. He stopped dead. Verity froze, a piece of beet poised on her fork. She expected to be thrown out. She expected judgment. Instead, Elias Roth grinned. It was a terrifying expression, mostly teeth. "Well, I'll be damned," the old man whispered. He leaned in close, inspecting Verity like she was a rare artifact. "You found a firecracker, boy. Look at those eyes." She's assessing my threat level. "Elias," Bram warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Step back." Elias ignored him. He reached out and snatched Verity's hand, bowing low to kiss her knuckles. He smelled like pipe tobacco and old leather books. Elias Roth, he introduced himself, winking. Former king of this miserable rock, currently retired and bored. And you must be the miracle worker who got my grandson to eat something that didn't bleed. Verity blinked, then smiled. She liked him immediately. Verity Sage, and actually, he made it. I'm just the taste tester. Elias threw his head back and cackled. It was a dry, rasping sound. He cooked? Bramwell? The boy who once tried to microwave a steak? He turned to Bram, his eyes gleaming with mischief. You must be desperate, son. You're pulling out all the stops. Go home, old man, Bram snapped. He stood up, towering over his grandfather, but Elias didn't even flinch. Make me, Elias challenged. He turned back to Verity. You know, he's terrible company. Broods too much, stares at walls. If I was 60 years younger, I'd fight him for you. You look like you have a spine. My Martha had a spine. A low, vibrating sound filled the room. It wasn't the wind. It was coming from Bram's chest. She's mine, Bram growled. It wasn't a sentence. It was a territorial claim. His eyes were flooding with gold, the pupils blown wide. Back. Off. Verity's breath hitched. The sound vibrated in her bones. Elias just slapped Bram on the arm. Finally, the boy has teeth. I thought you'd gone soft with all this corporate nonsense. He grabbed a chair, dragging it to the table with a screech. Pass the wine, Verity. Let's see if this swill is drinkable. Tofu, sensing a new chaotic energy, trotted over to Elias. The old man looked down at the pig in the bow tie. Is that a pig? Elias asked. Yes, Verity said. His name is Tofu. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a peppermint candy, unwrapping it and tossing it to the pig. I like him. He looks suspicious. Good trait in a pig. Chapter 8. The Morning After. The storm had hit Meridian City around dessert, lashing rain against the cliffs with hurricane force. Between the weather and Tofu's absolute refusal to walk in the mud to get to the car, Verity had been stranded. She woke up in a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a cloud of Egyptian cotton, and the windows offered a panoramic view of the gray, churning ocean. Oh, God, Verity groaned, burying her face in the pillow. I slept at the client's house. She checked her phone. 6 a.m. Tofu was snoring at the foot of the bed, belly up, dreaming of peppermint candies. Needing water, Verity slipped out of bed. She was still wearing one of Bram's oversized t-shirts he had lent her. It hung to her knees like a dress, and her own leggings. She tiptoed into the hallway. The fortress was silent, save for the distant hum of the ventilation system. She found her way toward the kitchen but took a wrong turn, ending up in a glass-walled corridor that looked down into a lower level. It was a gym, or rather, a torture chamber for giants. And Bram was there. Verity stopped, her hand gripping the railing. Bram was shirtless. He was doing pull-ups on a bar that looked reinforced with industrial steel. The muscles of his back shifted and coiled like pythons under his skin. Sweat glistened on his shoulders, tracing the lines of jagged silver scars that mapped his torso. Old wounds, violence etched into his flesh. He dropped from the bar, landing silently. He turned, grabbing a towel, and Verity felt the air leave her lungs. From the front, he was devastating. His chest was broad and covered in a light dusting of dark hair, tapering down to a V-line that disappeared into low-slung gray sweatpants. He looked powerful, ancient, and beautifully dangerous. He paused, sniffing the air. He looked up. His eyes locked onto hers through the glass. Even from this distance, she saw the gold flare. He didn't cover up. He didn't look away. He just stood there, breathing heavily, letting her look. The attraction hit her like a physical blow, a visceral, magnetic pull that made her toes curl against the cold stone floor. This wasn't just a crush. This was biological gravity. "Verity," he said. The glass muffled his voice, but she read his lips. Panic flared. Not fear of him, but fear of herself. Fear of how much she wanted to run down those stairs and touch those scars. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to be consumed by a man who occupied so much space. She turned and fled back to the guest room, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Behind her, in the gym, Bram watched her run. He wiped the sweat from his face, a slow, satisfied smirk touching his lips. She didn't look away, his wolf purred. She likes the scars. Chapter 9. The Sabotage. By the time Bram drove her back to the city in his tank-like SUV, Verity had regained her composure. The awkwardness of the morning was shoved aside by the buzzing of her phone. "It's the warehouse manager," Verity said, frowning at the screen. "The alarm tripped." Bram's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. "I'll drive you." "I have my scooter." "It's in the trunk," he reminded her. They pulled up to the Sage and Sprout warehouse in the industrial district. Verity's stomach dropped. The front door was slightly ajar. "Stay in the car," Bram commanded, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Excuse me?" Verity scoffed, already opening her door. "It's my warehouse, Roth, and Tofu needs to pee." She marched past him, though she noticed he stayed glued to her shoulder, his body acting as a human shield. Inside, it was chaos. Paint cans had been thrown against the walls. Her vintage mismatched china, collected over 5 years from estate sales, was shattered across the concrete floor. And sprayed across her eco-friendly bamboo backdrops in bright red paint were the words, "Hypocrite." "Vaughn," Verity whispered, her hands trembling. It was his handwriting. It was his petty, vindictive style. He knew she prided herself on her consistency. Calling her a hypocrite for working with a corporate monster like Bram was exactly his brand of psychological warfare. Bram stood in the center of the room. He was vibrating. The air around him crackled, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered ominously. He wasn't looking at the damage. He was smelling the air. "Wolf," he growled. "Beta. Male. Smells like cheap cologne and desperation." "It's my ex," Verity said, bending down to pick up a shard of a floral teacup. "He's trying to scare me into quitting the gala contract." "I will deploy a team," Bram said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I will have guards at your apartment. I will have this insect found and—" "No," Verity interrupted, standing up. She clutched the broken china to her chest. Bram turned to her, his eyes flashing gold. "He violated your territory. He threatened you. And if you send your paramilitary goons after him, you prove him right," Verity shouted. "He wants me to feel unsafe. He wants me to run to a big, strong man for protection so he can say, 'See, she's weak without me.' I am not weak, Bram." "I never said you were weak," Bram argued, stepping closer. "But you are under attack. I protect what is mine." Verity stiffened. "I am not yours, Roth. I am not property. I am a business partner, and I will handle Vaughn myself." "How?" Bram demanded, gesturing at the wreckage. "With a label maker?" "If I have to." They stared at each other, the air thick with unresolved tension and the smell of drying paint. Bram looked like he wanted to shift right there and tear the building down. His need to protect was warring with his fear of pushing her away. "Fine," Bram rasped, forcing his hands into his pockets. "But I am installing a new security system, sensors, cameras, non-lethal." Verity looked at the red paint dripping down the wall. She was exhausted. She was scared. But she wouldn't let him see it. Non-lethal, she agreed. And you help me clean this up. Chapter 10. The Compromise. 3 days later, the air in Bram's office was stale with the smell of burnt coffee and frustration. We cannot replace the metal detectors with flower arches, Verity, Bram said, rubbing his temples. They're aggressive, Verity argued, pacing the length of his office. It's a gala, not a checkpoint at a border crossing. We want people to feel welcome, not processed. I want people to not bring weapons near you, Bram muttered, low enough that she almost missed it. What? Nothing, he said, snapping another pen. We need a compromise. Concealed scanners, hidden in the floral arrangements. Expensive, Verity noted. I am rich, Bram countered. Very rich. Let me spend the money. Verity sighed, leaning against the edge of his desk. She was wearing a vintage silk blouse that shimmered in the afternoon light. Bram's eyes tracked the movement of the fabric. Fine, hidden scanners. But if they beep because someone has a hip replacement, your guards better be polite. My guards are professionals, Bram said, standing up. He walked around the desk, invading her personal space. He was doing that looming thing again. You look tired, he observed, reaching out as if to touch her face, then stopping his hand midair. I've been cleaning paint off bamboo for 3 days, Verity admitted. She didn't move away. She was too tired to fight the pull. Being near him felt like standing next to a furnace. It was warm. It was safe. I should have killed him, Bram whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Bram, Verity warned softly. I know. Accountability. He stepped closer. His thigh brushed against hers. The contact sent a shockwave through her. The overhead lights buzzed loudly. The computer monitor on his desk flickered black, then rebooted. You're doing the thing, Verity whispered, looking up at the light fixture. The glitchy thing. I can't help it, Bram rasped. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. He smelled like rain and cedar and suppressed power. You are frustrating and intoxicating. Verity's breath hitched. She should move. She should talk about the catering. Instead, she tilted her head back. Is that a complaint, Mr. Roth? Bram groaned, a low rumble in his chest. His hand clenched on the edge of the desk, gripping the wood so hard she heard it creak. Crack! A spiderweb fracture appeared in the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. Verity jumped. Bram pulled back instantly, his eyes wide and wild. I need to go, he said, his voice strained. He retreated to the other side of the room, putting distance between them. Meeting adjourned. Verity stood there, her heart pounding, looking at the cracked glass. She touched her lips, which tingled where his breath had hit them. He was dangerous. He was unstable. And she wanted him so bad it hurt. Chapter 11. The Date, Not a Date. The Saturday morning farmers market in Meridian City was a sensory riot. It was a cacophony of buskers playing violins, vendors shouting about artisanal honey, and the smell of roasting nuts clashing with fresh fish. For Verity Sage, it was paradise. For Bramwell Roth, it appeared to be the seventh circle of hell. You're squinting, Verity noted, handing him a reusable mesh bag filled with heirloom tomatoes. Is the sun too bright for your vampiric sensibilities? Bram adjusted his dark aviator sunglasses. He was wearing a casual navy polo that strained across his biceps and dark jeans that cost more than Verity's scooter. He looked out of place among the tie-dye and Birkenstocks, a shark swimming in a koi pond. It's loud, Bram grumbled, holding the bag of tomatoes like it contained a severed head. And it smells like unwashed humanity and patchouli. It smells like community, Verity corrected, leading him toward the flower stall. Stop looming. You're scaring the kombucha lady." Bram tried to shrink, which only made him look like a hunched grizzly bear. Verity watched him out of the corner of her eye. Since the incident in his office, the crack of the window, the way he had fled from her touch, things had been tense. He was trying so hard to be normal, to be the business partner she needed, but the energy rolling off him was palpable. They stopped at a stall selling crystals. A man with dreadlocks bumped into Verity hard, knocking her shoulder. "Watch it," the man muttered, not looking back. A low, vibrating growl erupted from Bram's chest. It was a sound so deep it rattled Verity's teeth. Bram took a step toward the man, his hand curling into a fist, the veins in his forearm bulging. "Bram!" Verity hissed. He didn't hear her. He was locked onto the stranger, his posture shifting into something lethal. The air pressure around them dropped. A string of fairy lights on the stall flickered and died. "Bram!" Verity reached out and grabbed his hand. The contact was electric. His skin was burning hot, but the moment her fingers interlaced with his, the tension snapped. He froze, looking down at their joined hands. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, rough and calloused. "He touched you," Bram rasped, his voice sounding wrecked. "It was an accident," Verity said softly, squeezing his hand. "I'm fine. Look at me." He looked. Behind the dark lenses of his glasses, she couldn't see his eyes, but she felt the weight of his stare. It was heavy, possessive, and terrified. "I don't like crowds," he admitted, the words pulled from him like teeth. "Too much input, too many heartbeats." "Then focus on one," Verity said. She didn't let go of his hand. "Just focus on mine." Bram went still. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her shampoo and the lavender soap from the stall next to them. His shoulders dropped an inch. He squeezed her hand back, engulfing it completely. "Okay," he whispered. "Yours." They walked the rest of the market hand in hand. Bram didn't growl again, though he did glare at a golden retriever that looked at Verity too affectionately. For a man who ran a paramilitary empire, he held her hand as if it were the only anchor keeping him from floating away into the storm. Chapter 12. Tofu's Playdate. "I cannot believe this is happening," Verity mumbled, her voice distorted by the cotton gauze packed into her cheek. "Go!" Bram commanded, standing in the doorway of her apartment. He looked comically large in her small, eclectic hallway. "My driver is downstairs. He will take you to the oral surgeon. I have secured the appointment." "I can drive," Verity argued, though a throb of agony from her cracked molar made her wince. She had bitten into a rogue olive pit at lunch, and the result was catastrophic. "You are in pain," Bram stated, his eyes dark. "You are not operating a scooter. I will watch the pig." Verity looked at Tofu. The micro-pig, who was currently the size of a sturdy ottoman, was sitting on the rug, staring at Bram with calculating eyes. Tofu was wearing his "I'm the boss" sweater. "He's difficult," Verity warned, grabbing her purse. "He needs to go out every 2 hours. Do not feed him after 4 p.m. or he gets gas. And if he screams, it's just for attention. Don't negotiate with terrorists." "I handle high-value assets for a living," Bram said, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "I can handle a pig." Verity gave him a doubtful look, but let the pain drive her out the door. "Good luck, Roth. You're going to need it." 3 hours later, Verity was numb, drooling slightly, and resting in the back of Bram's luxury SUV. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Bram. No words, just an image. Verity clicked it open and gasped. The photo was taken in Bram's ultra-modern minimalist penthouse. Or rather, what used to be a minimalist penthouse. In the background, a white leather Eames chair was overturned. A trail of what looked like potting soil was dragged across the pristine marble floors, leading to a shattered vase that had likely cost more than Verity's car. But in the foreground was the selfie. Bram was lying on the floor, his tie undone, his expensive shirt covered in dirt paw prints. He looked exhausted, staring at the camera with a deadpan expression of total defeat. Asleep on Bram's chest, drooling onto his silk tie, was Tofu. The pig looked angelic. Bram. He ate the ficus. Bram. Then he screamed at the Alexa until it played classical music. Bram. We are negotiating a truce. Verity laughed, a bubbly, painkiller-fueled sound. She zoomed in on the photo. Bram's hand was resting protectively over Tofu's flank, his large fingers curled gently into the pig's bristles. He wasn't just tolerating the chaos, he was embracing it. Verity. You look comfortable. The dots bubbled for a long time. Bram. He is warm, and he snores louder than my grandfather. Verity pressed the phone to her chest. Her tooth throbbed, but her heart felt strangely full. Bramwell Roth, the monster of Meridian City, had been defeated by a pig in a sweater. And he didn't seem to mind one bit. Chapter 13. The Ex Returns. The numbness in Verity's jaw had faded to a dull ache by the next morning, but she refused to miss her morning coffee run. She needed caffeine to deal with the logistics of the upcoming gala, especially since the venue manager was threatening to quit over the no single-use plastic rule. She sat in the back corner of the roasted bean, her laptop open, aggressively typing an email. V? The voice was like nails on a chalkboard. Verity froze. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The smell of cheap cologne and condescension wafted over her. Vaughn. She kept typing. Go away, Vaughn. Come on, babe, Vaughn said, sliding into the chair opposite her without asking. He was handsome in a generic slippery way, blonde hair gelled within an inch of its life, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Don't be like that. I heard about your warehouse. Terrible luck. Verity slammed her laptop shut. It wasn't luck. It was red paint. And if I find proof it was you, I'm pressing charges. Vaughn laughed, leaning back. Paranoid as always. That's why we didn't work, V. You're too rigid, too difficult. You need someone to help you loosen up. Someone who understands the real world. I understand perfectly, Verity said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in her blood. I understand that you're a narcissist who can't handle rejection. Leave. And go where? Vaughn sneered, leaning over the table. To that freak you're working for? Roth? Everyone knows what he is, Verity. He's a monster. He's dangerous. You think you're safe with him? You're just a pet to him, a little vegan toy until he gets bored and snaps you in half. He treats me with more respect in 5 minutes than you did in 5 years, Verity spat. Vaughn's eyes darkened. He reached out, grabbing her wrist. You're coming with me. We need to talk private. A shadow fell over the table. It wasn't just a shadow. It was an eclipse. The morning light from the window was completely blocked out by the figure standing behind Vaughn. Bram didn't speak. He didn't move. He just loomed. But the heavy, suffocating glamour he usually wore to dampen his presence was gone. He had dropped the leash on his aura. He was wearing a black trench coat that made him look like a grim reaper who shopped on Savile Row. His face was a mask of terrifying, violent stillness. His eyes were fixed on Vaughn's hand touching Verity's wrist. The air in the coffee shop grew heavy, pressurized, like the inside of a submarine diving too deep. The espresso machine behind the counter shrieked and died. Vaughn froze. He looked up, and the color drained from his face so fast he looked gray. He snatched his hand back as if Verity's skin had turned white hot. Vaughn stammered, scrambling out of the chair. I was just leaving. Bram didn't blink. He tilted his head slightly, a microscopic movement that promised unimaginable violence. Vaughn bolted. He didn't walk, he ran, knocking over a chair in his haste to get out the door. Verity let out a shaky breath, rubbing her wrist. She looked up at Bram. His jaw was clenched so hard she could see a muscle jumping. His eyes were storm gray, but the edges were bleeding gold. Are you hurt? Bram asked. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. No, Verity whispered. He didn't hurt me. Bram looked at the chair Vaughn had sat in. For a second, Verity thought he was going to incinerate it with his mind. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her shoulder. Let's go, he said. Now. Chapter 14. The Monster in the Suit. Bram walked Verity to his car, his hand hovering at the small of her back without touching her, a heated shield against the world. He moved with a jerky, disjointed rhythm, as if his own skin was too tight for his body. Bram, slow down, Verity said, jogging to keep up with his long strides. He's gone. It's okay. It is not okay, Bram snarled. He didn't look at her. He was scanning the street, his head snapping side to side. He touched you. Again. He was in your space. They reached the SUV. Bram wrenched the door open for her, but before she could get in, a street lamp above them popped with a loud bang, raining sparks onto the sidewalk. Verity jumped back. Bram! He spun around, away from her, clutching the roof of the car. The metal groaned under his grip. His breathing was ragged, harsh gasps tearing from his chest. Get in the car, he commanded, his voice distorted. It sounded double-layered, a human voice overlaid with a guttural growl. Not until you tell me what's wrong! Verity reached out, grabbing his arm. His muscles were rock-hard, vibrating violently. He tried to pull away, but she held on. Bram, look at me! He turned. Verity froze. His eyes were gone. There was no white, no gray. They were pools of molten, glowing gold, slit with vertical pupils. But it wasn't just his eyes. His hands were gripping the car door, and his fingernails were wrong. They were thick, black, and elongated into curved points that were digging deep gouges into the bulletproof steel. Don't look, Bram choked out. He squeezed his eyes shut, his face contorting in agony. Verity, please, don't look at me. The car alarm of the vehicle next to them started blaring. The digital display on a nearby parking meter fried, sparking out. Verity stared at his hand, at the claws sinking into the metal like it was clay. It wasn't a metaphor. The lion's den, the wolf comments, the raw steaks, the way he smelled things before they happened. Verity breathed, stepping back. Her heel hit the curb. Bram flinched at the sound of her retreating. He opened his eyes, still golden, still terrifying, and looked at her with pure devastation. Monster, he whispered. He yanked the car door open, practically throwing himself into the driver's seat. Get in, he roared, the sound animalistic. Before I lose it completely. Verity didn't argue. She got in. Chapter 15. The Truth. The drive to the Eyrie was silent and terrifyingly fast. Bram drove with a precision that bordered on supernatural, his clawed hands gripping the leather steering wheel so hard the material tore. When they arrived, Bram didn't wait for her. He bailed out of the car and stormed toward the cliff edge, away from the house, away from her. Verity sat in the passenger seat for a long minute, her heart racing. She replayed everything in her mind. The strength, the speed, the growls. He's a werewolf. The thought should have been impossible. It should have been laughable. But in Meridian City, where the fog felt alive and the forests were too old, it felt inevitable. She got out of the car. She walked toward the cliff. Bram was standing at the edge, looking out at the ocean. His back was to her. He had taken off his jacket, and his shirt was shredded across the shoulders. "Bram," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. He didn't turn. "Go inside, Verity. Take the car. Go home." "No," she said. She stepped closer. "Tell me." "I told you," he rasped. "I am a monster. A wolf." "I know what I saw," Verity said, stopping a few feet away. "Your eyes. Your hands." Bram laughed, a bitter, broken sound. He finally turned. His eyes were fading back to gray, but he looked exhausted, hollowed out. "You think I'm crazy," he said. "You think I'm some eccentric billionaire with anger issues and a god complex, a Wolf of Wall Street metaphor gone wrong." Verity paused. Was that what he thought? That she didn't believe the literal truth? "Bram," she said carefully, "I saw your claws tear through steel." "Adrenaline," he dismissed, waving a hand. "Hysterical strength. The mind rationalizes what it cannot accept." He looked at her, his expression pleading. "I have a condition, a beast inside. It takes over when I am angry, when I am protective." He was giving her an out. He was framing it as a psychological break, a metaphor for his rage, because he thought the truth would send her running screaming. Verity looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was terrified she would leave. If she admitted she knew he was a literal supernatural creature, the reality might break the fragile trust between them. He wasn't ready to be fully seen yet. He was testing the waters. "Everyone has demons, Bram," she said softly. "My ex had a temper. He used it to control me." Bram flinched. "I would never hurt you." "I know," she said. And she did. Even when his eyes were glowing, even when he was crushing steel, he had moved away from her. He had protected her from himself. She stepped forward and took his hand. The claws were gone, but the skin was red and irritated. She kissed his knuckles, right over the bruised skin. "You're not a monster," she whispered. "You're just complicated." Bram let out a shuddering breath, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "Complicated," he repeated. "I can work with complicated." "Just no more destroying public property," Verity murmured. "And we take this slow. Whatever this is, I can't handle any more surprises." "Slow," Bram agreed, closing his eyes. "I can do slow." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. Verity hugged him back, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. It was beating too fast, too strong for a human. "I'm dating a werewolf," she thought, burying her face in his chest. "Tofu is going to be so jealous." Chapter 16. The Rival. 2 days after the incident at the cliff and the subsequent talk where Bram had tried to convince her his lycanthropy was a metaphor for anger management issues, Verity was walking Tofu in Meridian City's Central Park. It was a crisp, foggy morning. Verity wore a trench coat belted tight, clutching a travel mug of oat milk latte like a lifeline. Tofu, currently wearing a custom-made denim vest with a patch that read, "Security," trotted beside her on a neon green leash. "Come on, Tofu," Verity urged, checking her watch. "I have a vendor meeting in 20 minutes. Do your business." Tofu ignored her, rooting enthusiastically in a patch of ornamental ivy. "Cute dog." a voice sneered from behind her. Verity turned. Standing on the path was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in sleaze. He was tall, blonde, and wearing a suit that was too shiny. He smelled like musk and ozone, the same sharp scent Bram carried, but soured, like milk left in the sun. "He's a pig," Verity corrected, tightening her grip on the leash. "And we're busy." "You're Verity Sage," the man said, stepping closer. He didn't blink. "Bram's little pet project." Verity's spine stiffened. "I'm his event planner. Who are you?" "Soren," he said, smiling to reveal teeth that looked too white, too sharp. "I run the Obsidian logistics firm across town. We're competitors. Bram took a contract I wanted, and now I hear he's taken a mate." Verity's heart hammered. Mate. He used the word Bram hadn't said aloud. "I don't know what you're talking about," Verity said, stepping between Soren and Tofu. "Leave us alone." Soren laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. He looked down at Tofu. "Bram always did have soft tastes. Keeping a pig? It's embarrassing. In my pack, we eat the weak." He moved faster than a human should. One moment, he was standing 3 feet away. The next, he was crouching, reaching for Tofu. Tofu squealed, a high-pitched scream of terror. "Don't touch him!" Verity yelled. Soren grabbed the back of Tofu's denim vest. "Maybe I'll send Bram a message. A little pork chop in a box?" Rage, white-hot and blinding, flooded Verity's system. She didn't think. She didn't scream for help. She reached into her purse, past the bamboo stylus, and grabbed the canister of military-grade pepper spray she had started carrying after Vaughn. "I said," Verity snarled, "don't touch my pig." She aimed and pressed the trigger. A jet of orange chemical fog hit Soren point blank in the eyes. Soren howled. It wasn't a human scream. It was a guttural, animalistic roar that shook the leaves off the nearby trees. He dropped Tofu, clawing at his face, stumbling back. "You little buh!" Soren choked, his skin turning a furious mottled red. "Run, Tofu!" Verity commanded. She grabbed the pig, adrenaline giving her the strength to scoop up the 50-pound animal, and bolted toward the park exit. She didn't look back at the man writhing on the ground, growling sounds that were distinctly canine erupting from his throat. She just ran, her breath tearing in her lungs, wishing she had a panic button. Chapter 17. The Brawl. Verity made it 2 blocks before a black sedan screeched onto the curb, cutting off her path. It wasn't Bram's usual tank-like SUV. This was a sleek, low-slung interceptor. The door flew open. Bram didn't step out. He launched himself. "Verity!" He was on her in a second, his hands hovering over her shoulders, checking for injuries without touching her. His eyes were wild, the irises spinning with molten gold. He smelled like burning rubber and terrifying violence. "I'm fine," Verity gasped, clutching a shivering Tofu to her chest. "Soren. He was in the park. He tried to grab Tofu." Bram went still. The air around him dropped 20 degrees. The street lamp above them popped, raining sparks onto the pavement. "He touched you?" Bram's voice was a subsonic rumble that vibrated in Verity's molars. "No, I pepper sprayed him," Verity said breathlessly. "He's still back there." Bram looked past her, toward the park. His face shifted. The human mask slipped, revealing the predator underneath. His jaw unhinged slightly, his teeth looking sharper, his skin pulling tight over his bones. "Get in the car," Bram ordered. It wasn't a suggestion. Lock the doors. Bram, don't get in. He turned and sprinted toward the park. He moved with a terrifying, blurring speed, covering the ground like a missile. Verity scrambled into the car, locking the doors as instructed. But she couldn't just sit there. She watched through the rear windshield. She saw Soren stumbling out of the park, eyes streaming, furious. And she saw Bram collide with him. It wasn't a fight. It was a demolition. Bram didn't throw punches. He struck with the force of a wrecking ball. He slammed Soren into a brick wall so hard the masonry cracked. Soren fought back, swiping with clawed hands, but Bram was bigger, faster, and infinitely more enraged. It was visceral. It was bloody. Bram grabbed Soren by the lapels of his expensive suit and threw him through a wooden park bench, splintering it into kindling. Verity watched, her hand over her mouth. This wasn't Hollywood action. This was raw, bone-breaking violence. It was the monster Bram had warned her about. Bram pinned Soren to the ground, his fist raised, ready to deliver a killing blow. His roar echoed off the buildings, a sound that triggered every primal fear instinct in Verity's brain. "Bram!" she screamed, though he couldn't hear her through the glass. At the last second, Bram stopped. He didn't strike. He leaned down, snarling something into Soren's bloody face, then shoved him away with disgust. Bram stood up. He turned toward the car. His knuckles were split and bleeding. His white dress shirt was splattered with red, Soren's blood. His chest was heaving. As he walked back to the car, his eyes met Verity's through the glass. The gold was fading, replaced by a horrified gray clarity. He saw her face. He saw the fear. He stopped 10 feet away, looking at his bloodied hands, then at her. He looked like a man waking up from a nightmare, to realize he was the monster in it. Chapter 18. The Withdrawal. The drive back to Verity's apartment was silent. A suffocating, heavy silence that pressed against Verity's ears. Bram parked the car, but didn't unlock the doors immediately. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the blood on his hands drying into dark, flaky crusts. He wouldn't look at her. "He won't bother you again," Bram said. His voice was rough, like gravel in a blender. "You could have killed him," Verity whispered. He threatened you," Bram corrected, staring out the windshield. "He is lucky I let him walk away." Verity looked at his profile, the sharp jaw, the tension radiating off him. She thought of Vaughn, shouting, throwing paint cans. Then she thought of Bram, throwing a grown man through a bench. The scale was different, but the fear was the same. The unpredictability, the violence simmering just under the skin. "Bram," she said. He flinched. "Don't." "I can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't watch you tear people apart." Bram finally turned to look at her. His eyes were bleak, hollowed out. "I protected you." "I know," Verity said, tears pricking her eyes. "And I protected myself with pepper spray. We didn't need that. The blood, the rage. It's too much, Bram. My ex, he had a temper. He broke things when he was angry. I promised myself I wouldn't let that back into my life." "I am not him," Bram rasped. "I would never hurt you." "But you hurt everything around me to keep me safe," Verity countered. "What happens when you lose control and I'm the one standing too close? What happens when the glitch isn't just a cracked window?" Bram looked at his hands, the blood on his knuckles. He closed his eyes. "You're right," he whispered. He unlocked the doors. "You are safer without me," Bram said, his voice dead. "Soren came after you because of me. The vandalism was because of me. I am a hazard." "Bram, that's not what I—" "Go inside, Verity," he interrupted. He didn't look at her. He looked broken. "I will keep the security detail on your apartment. I will make sure the gala is funded. But I will stay away." Verity hesitated. Part of her wanted to reach out, to clean his hands, to tell him they could fix this. But the image of him smashing Soren into the wall was still branded on her retinas. She was shaking. She opened the door. "Goodbye, Bram." She gathered Tofu and stepped out onto the sidewalk. She waited for him to say something, to stop her, to fight for them. Bram put the car in gear and drove away without looking back. Chapter 19. The Silence. 2 weeks. 14 days of gray rain in Meridian City. 14 days of silence. Verity Sage was miserable. Her apartment was clean, aggressively clean. She had labeled everything, including the inside of her refrigerator. But the silence was deafening. There were no ominous black SUVs parked outside, no flickering lights, no awkward looming texts about kale. Even Tofu was depressed. The pig spent his days lying by the front door, sighing dramatically. He had chewed the heel off Verity's favorite boots, acting out in a way he hadn't since he was a piglet. "He's not coming back, Tofu," Verity said, sitting on the floor next to the pig. She looked at the rain streaking the window. "We told him to leave. Remember?" Tofu grunted and rested his chin on her knee. Verity checked her phone for the 100th time. The gala was 3 days away. The venue was set, the vegan menu was approved by Bram's assistant, and the security protocols were in place. But Bram hadn't attended a single meeting. He was a ghost. A knock at the door made Verity jump. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Bram?" She scrambled up and threw the door open. It wasn't Bram. Elias Roth stood in the hallway, leaning on his black oak cane. He looked wet, annoyed, and older than he had at the dinner. "Grandpa Elias?" Verity blinked. "Move aside, girl," Elias grumbled, pushing past her into the apartment. "It smells like sadness and lemon polish in here." He limped to the couch and sat down with a heavy sigh. Tofu immediately trotted over and sniffed Elias's shoes. Elias didn't have a peppermint this time. "Where is he?" Verity asked, closing the door. "Rotting," Elias said bluntly. "Sitting in that glass tower of his, staring at the wall. He hasn't eaten in 4 days. His wolf is eating him alive from the inside out." Verity felt a cold knot form in her stomach. He's fasting?" "He's grieving," Elias corrected, fixing her with a sharp stare. "Shifters don't handle separation well, Verity, especially when they think they've been rejected by their mate. It physically hurts, like withdrawal." "I didn't reject him," Verity defended, crossing her arms. "I set a boundary. He was violent." "He's a predator," Elias snapped, slamming his cane on the floor. "He defended you the only way he knows how. Is he rough? Yes. Is he a socially awkward idiot? Absolutely. But he loves you, girl. And right now, he thinks his very existence is poison to you." Verity looked at Tofu, who was nuzzling Elias's hand. She thought about the beefsteak, the way Bram held her hand in the market, the way he had shielded her from the exploding street lamp. "He's starving himself?" she whispered. "He's punishing himself," Elias said softly. "He thinks if he gets weak enough, the monster will die, and maybe then he'll be good enough for you." Verity felt tears prick her eyes. The idiot. The absolute, self-sacrificing, dramatic idiot. He needs to eat, Verity said, grabbing her keys. He won't take food from me, Elias warned, or his staff. Verity marched to the kitchen. She opened the fridge, pulling out the leftovers of the spicy tofu stir-fry she had made last night. She shoved it into a Tupperware container. "He'll eat what I serve," she said, grabbing her coat. "Or I'll force-feed him." Elias grinned, a wicked, toothy expression. "That's my girl. Take the pig. He needs backup." Chapter 20. The Tupperware Intervention. Ironclad security was a fortress of glass and steel, but tonight it felt like a tomb. The lobby was empty. The security guard at the desk recognized Verity and just pointed mutely toward the elevators, looking terrified. "Come on, Tofu," Verity whispered. The pig, having lost one of his rear boots in the elevator, did an uneven squeak-click-squeak shuffle across the marble floor. They rode the elevator to the top floor. The lights overhead flickered constantly, a strobe effect of Bram's misery. The doors opened. The penthouse office was dark, lit only by the gray glow of the city rain outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was cold, smelling of ozone and despair. Bram was sitting behind his desk. He hadn't turned on a lamp. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the cracked window he still hadn't fixed. He looked wrecked. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair messy, a dark shadow of stubble on his jaw. His cheekbones looked sharper, his skin pale. He looked like a king who had lost his kingdom. "Go away, Elias," Bram rasped, not looking up. His voice was a dry husk. "Not Elias," Verity said, stepping into the room. Bram froze. He slowly lifted his head. When he saw her, his eyes widened. They were dull, the gold extinguished, leaving only flat, stormy gray. "Verity?" he whispered. He stood up but swayed slightly, catching himself on the desk. "Is something wrong? Are you hurt? Did Soren?" "Soren is fine. I'm fine," Verity said, marching across the room. Tofu trotted ahead of her, oinking softly. Bram looked down at the pig, then back at Verity. He looked like he was hallucinating. "Why are you here? You said—" "I said I couldn't watch you tear people apart," Verity interrupted. She reached his desk and slammed the Tupperware container down on the mahogany surface. It made a loud thwack. "I didn't say I wanted you to starve yourself to death, you melodramatic oaf." Bram stared at the Tupperware. "I'm not hungry." "Liar," Verity snapped. "Your grandfather told me. You haven't eaten in 4 days. Your metabolism runs at the speed of light. You're killing yourself." "I am containing the threat," Bram muttered, looking away. "If I am weak, I am less dangerous." "You're not a nuclear reactor, Bram. You're a man." Verity walked around the desk. She grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at her. His skin was cold. "And right now, you look like hell." Bram flinched at her touch, his breath hitching. "Don't. Please. I can't." "You can," she said firmly. She popped the lid of the Tupperware. The smell of spicy peanut sauce and fried tofu filled the air. Bram's stomach let out a treacherous, deafening growl. "Eat," Verity commanded. She picked up a plastic fork she'd brought and stabbed a piece of tofu. She held it to his lips. Bram stared at her. His resistance crumbled. He was starving, yes, but he was starving for her more than the food. He opened his mouth and took the bite. He chewed slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good," Verity whispered, her voice softening. "Now eat the rest, you idiot, or I'm telling Tofu to eat your other shoe." Bram swallowed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, weak, but there. "Yes, ma'am," he rasped. Chapter 21. The Reconciliation. Bram scraped the bottom of the Tupperware container, chasing the last piece of tofu with a focus usually reserved for dismantling security threats. The spicy peanut sauce had stained the corner of his mouth, a strangely human detail on a face that usually looked carved from marble. "Better?" Verity asked, sitting on the edge of his massive mahogany desk. Bram set the fork down. He looked less like a corpse now, though the dark circles under his eyes remained. "My metabolism, it burns fast. When I don't eat, the wolf starts to cannibalize my reserves. It hurts." "Then don't do it again," Verity said softly, her voice firm. "Martyrdom doesn't suit you, Roth. You look terrible in it." Bram looked up at her. The gold in his eyes was gone, replaced by a soft, stormy gray that held a depth of vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, flat velvet box. Verity stiffened. "Bram, if that's a ring, I'm going to hit you with the stapler." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It is not a ring. It is accountability." He slid the box across the desk. Verity opened it. Inside wasn't a diamond, but a small, sleek device made of matte black metal. It looked like a high-end key fob with a single, recessed silver button in the center. "A garage door opener?" she asked, confused. "A panic button," Bram corrected. "It is linked directly to my personal frequency. It bypasses the police, the dispatch, everything. If you press it, I will know exactly where you are, and I will come." Verity frowned, her thumb tracing the silver button. "You said you wouldn't track me." "I won't," Bram said intensely, leaning forward. "That is the point. The device is dormant. It emits no signal. I have removed the GPS trackers from your scooter. I have pulled the detail off your apartment. You are invisible to me, Verity, unless you choose to call." Verity stared at the device. It was the opposite of what Vaughn had done. Vaughn had checked her odometer. Bram was handing her the keys to his leash. He was giving her the power to summon the monster or to leave him in the dark forever. "You're giving me control," she whispered. "I am giving you a choice," Bram rasped. He stood up, swaying slightly before gripping the desk. "I am violent. I am dangerous. I cannot change what I am. But I swear to you, I will never direct that violence toward you, and I will never come where I am not wanted." Verity looked at the man who had starved himself for 2 weeks just to keep her safe from his own nature. She looked at Tofu, who was currently chewing on the wheel of Bram's desk chair, completely unafraid. She closed the box and slipped it into her pocket. Then, she reached out and grabbed Bram's tie, the expensive silk he always wore, and yanked him forward. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice trembling. "But you're my idiot." Bram let out a ragged breath, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "Does that mean I can come to the gala?" "If you don't," Verity warned, "I'll tell everyone you're afraid of a micro pig." Bram chuckled, a low, rusty sound that vibrated against her skin. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her like it was oxygen. "I am afraid of the pig," he murmured against her skin. "But I'm more afraid of losing you." Chapter 22. The Gala Begins. The Winter Solstice Gala was a triumph of sustainable design. Verity had transformed the stark industrial hall of the Meridian Convention Center into a living forest. Walls of living moss absorbed the sound of the chatter. Bamboo arches replaced metal detectors, with the hidden sensors Bram insisted on, and the centerpieces were potted saplings that guests could take home to plant. It smelled of pine, earth, and expensive champagne. Verity stood by the entrance, adjusting her vintage emerald silk dress. She scanned the room, her clipboard clutched to her chest. Everything was perfect. The vegan hors d'oeuvres were circulating, the string quartet was playing, and the press was behaving. "Relax," a deep voice rumbled in her ear. Bram appeared beside her. He cleaned up nicely. In a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders like a second skin, he looked devastating. He was still pale, but the hollow look was gone, replaced by his usual terrifying stoicism. "I don't relax until the last guest leaves," Verity whispered. "Is Tofu okay?" "My grandfather is watching him," Bram said, "which means they are likely eating ice cream and judging my furniture." Suddenly, a commotion at the press line drew their attention. "I have a right to be here!" a voice shouted. Verity froze. Vaughn. He was pushing past a security guard, looking disheveled and frantic. He spotted Verity standing next to Bram and pointed a shaking finger. "There! She's a fraud! Ask her about the warehouse! Ask her why she's protecting that monster standing right next to her." The reporters turned, sensing drama. Cameras flashed. Bram stiffened. A low growl started in his chest, inaudible to anyone but Verity. His hands curled into fists. He took a step forward, his body angling to intercept. "No," Verity said. Her hand brushed the velvet lump of the panic button, hidden in the pocket she'd sewn into the dress herself. But she didn't press it. She didn't need a rescue. She needed a witness. She placed her hand flat on Bram's chest. He stopped instantly, looking down at her. His eyes were darkening, the gold bleeding in. "He is threatening you," Bram hissed. "He's embarrassing himself," Verity corrected. "Let me handle it." She stepped away from Bram's protection and walked toward Vaughn. She didn't look scared. She looked bored. "Vaughn," she said, her voice projecting clearly over the murmuring crowd. "You're not on the list. And you're wearing brown shoes with a black belt. It's tragic." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Vaughn flushed red. "You think you're so smart, Verity? You're protecting a monster." "I'm protecting my event from a man who throws tantrums and paint cans when he gets dumped," Verity said coolly. She signaled the security team. "Escort Mr. Vaughn out and recycle his invite. We don't waste paper here." Two massive guards, shifters from Bram's pack, stepped forward. They didn't need to use force. Their sheer size was enough. Vaughn sputtered, looking small and petty, before turning and fleeing the cameras. Verity turned back to Bram. He was watching her with an expression of absolute awe. "You didn't need me," he said softly as she returned to his side. "I never needed you to save me, Bram," Verity said, linking her arm through his. "I just wanted you to stand beside me while I saved myself." Chapter 23. The Speech. The time had come. The moment Bram feared more than silver bullets or rival alphas. Public speaking. "I can't do this," Bram muttered, tugging at his bow tie. They were backstage, hidden behind a wall of ivy. "My heart rate is 140. The glitch will happen. I will short out the microphone." "You'll be fine," Verity said, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. "Just look at me. Ignore the crowd. Ignore the lights. Just tell them the truth." "The truth is, I want to take you home and never leave my apartment again," Bram grumbled. "Tell them the other truth," Verity smiled. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. "Go get him, tiger." Or wolf. Bram took a deep breath, centered himself, and walked onto the stage. The applause was polite but hesitant. Meridian City knew Bramwell Roth as a recluse, a cold corporate figurehead. He stood at the podium, gripping the wood so hard Verity worried it might splinter. He stared out at the sea of faces, blinking against the spotlight. The microphone whined, a high-pitched feedback squeal. Bram flinched. The lights flickered. Then he found Verity in the wings. She gave him a thumbs up. Bram exhaled. The lights stabilized. "Ironclad Security has a reputation," Bram began, his voice deep and resonant without needing to shout. "We are known for force, for walls, for keeping things out." He paused, looking down at his prepared notes, then crumpling them up. "I built this company because I believed the world was dangerous," he said, speaking off the cuff. "I believed that safety meant isolation, that if you built the walls high enough, nothing could hurt you." The room was dead silent. "I was wrong," Bram said. "Safety isn't about walls. It's about community. It's about accountability." He looked directly at Verity. "Tonight, I am announcing the PAC Initiative, a new division of Ironclad dedicated to community support, transparency, and environmental protection. We are taking down the fences. We are opening the doors." He took a breath. "And I would like to credit the architect of this change, Miss Verity Sage. She taught me that you don't have to be a monster to be strong, and that even a predator can learn to eat beets." A wave of laughter rippled through the room. Bram smiled, a genuine, rare smile that transformed his harsh face into something handsome. "To Verity," he said, raising a glass of water, "the bravest person I know." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was thunderous. Verity stood in the wings, tears streaming down her face as her terrifying, wonderful Alpha King bowed to her from the stage. Chapter 24: The Balcony. The noise of the party faded as Bram opened the glass door to the rooftop terrace. The winter air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of the nearby ocean. "You did it," Verity said, stepping out into the moonlight. "You didn't break the podium, and you made a beat joke." Bram closed the door, sealing them in the quiet dark. He turned to her, the adrenaline of the speech fading into something darker, heavier. The pull that Elias had talked about, the biological gravity between them, was no longer a subtle tug. It was a riptide. "I meant every word," Bram rasped, stepping closer. "You changed everything, Verity. My pack, my company, me." He stopped inches from her. He didn't touch her yet. He was waiting, as he always did, for her permission. The panic button in human form. Verity looked up at him. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, the storm cloud gray of his eyes. "I don't want to go slow anymore," Verity whispered. Bram went still. "Verity." "I'm tired of slow," she said, stepping into his space. She reached up, her hand sliding into his hair, pulling his head down. "I want to see the wolf, Bram. I want all of it." Bram groaned, a sound torn from the bottom of his chest. His restraint snapped. He swept her up into his arms, lifting her effortlessly until she was eye level with him. He kissed her, and it wasn't gentle. It was starving. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding his breath for a lifetime and finally found oxygen. Verity wrapped her legs around his waist, clinging to him as he walked them backward, pressing her against the cool stone railing of the balcony. The kiss deepened, becoming visceral and all-consuming. "Mine," he growled against her lips, his voice dropping into that terrifying, wonderful alpha resonance. "Yours," she gasped back. He pulled back slightly, his eyes glowing pure molten gold. He wasn't hiding it this time. He let her see the beast, the hunger, the possessiveness, the raw power. And for the first time, he saw no fear in her eyes, only welcome. "I love you," Bram whispered, the words sounding like a confession of sin. "I love you so much it hurts." Verity smiled, tracing the scar on his jaw. "I love you too, Bram. Claws and all." Bram buried his face in her neck, shuddering as the tension of years finally left his body. He was the Alpha King, the apex predator, the monster in the suit. But here, in her arms, he was just a man coming home. Chapter 25, Epilogue, 6 months later. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, illuminating a scene of utter domestic chaos. "Eat it," Verity said, pointing a spatula at the plate. Bramwell Roth sat at the kitchen island, staring at the veggie burger as if it were a live grenade. "It mimics the texture of beef," Verity promised. "It bleeds beet juice. You'll love it." Bram looked skeptical. He looked at Grandpa Elias, who was sitting across from him reading the newspaper. "Don't look at me," Elias cackled. "She's your mate. You signed the contract." Bram sighed and took a bite. He chewed. He frowned. He swallowed. "Acceptable," he grunted. "High praise," Verity beamed, kissing him on the cheek as she walked past with her coffee. A sharp clack-clack-clack echoed on the marble floor. Tofu, now fully grown and weighing a solid 70 pounds, trotted into the kitchen. He was wearing a custom-made tuxedo vest for a wedding they were planning later, and looked extremely important. Tofu stopped at Bram's feet and let out a demanding squeal. Bram didn't even look down. He automatically reached onto his plate, broke off a piece of the veggie burger, and dropped it. Tofu inhaled it and leaned his entire 70-pound weight against Bram's shin, purring like a chainsaw. "He respects you now," Elias observed. "He thinks you're a decent food dispenser." "He thinks I'm his staff," Bram corrected, sipping his coffee, but his hand drifted down to scratch the pig behind the ears. Verity leaned against the counter, watching them. The terrifying Alpha King, the sassy octogenarian, and the pig in a tuxedo. It was a strange, mismatched, chaotic little pack, and it was perfect. "By the way," Bram said, looking up at her, "the sensor on the terrace is glitching again. I think the ivy is growing into the wiring." "I'll fix it," Verity said. "Or I'll just plant more ivy." Bram smiled, a real easy smile that reached his eyes. "Plant more ivy. I like the green." He stood up, walking over to her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. Tofu grunted in protest at the loss of the scratching hand, but Bram ignored him. "Happy?" Bram whispered, resting his chin on top of her head. Verity looked around the penthouse. It wasn't cold anymore. It was filled with plants, books, mismatched furniture, and life. "Yeah," she whispered back, leaning into him. "I'm happy." Bram kissed the top of her head. "Good. Now, are we done with the vegetables? Because my wolf would really like a steak. A real one." Verity laughed, rolling her eyes. "Fine, you can cook it yourself, but don't let Tofu see or he'll demand a side of kale." "Deal." "Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Verity was brave for rejecting the Alpha King's steak dinner and making him eat tofu, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is absolutely unhinged.